Welcome to the second meeting of the Rules Advisory Committee for the Place-Based Water Planning Fund. As you all know by now, my name is Lily Prawl, and I am the Planning Coordinator at the Oregon Water Resources Department, and I am joined today by my colleagues Marco and Kim, who are here to help support our discussion today. I'm going to start off today with some reminders of best practices for our virtual meeting, and then we have a few new faces that weren't at our last meeting, so we'll take a moment to have them introduce themselves, and then we will dive into the content for today. So, similar to our last RAC meeting, this meeting is open to the public. As you can probably already tell, the meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be posted to our rulemaking website and the OWRD YouTube channel. There are quite a few of us here today, so we just ask that if you're not speaking, that you remain on mute. Since we're having our meeting over the lunch hour, if you need to turn off your camera while you eat, that is totally fine. As we go through things today, because we have such a big group, we ask that you please use the raise hand feature to indicate when you'd like to speak, and I will call on you. And also, because this meeting is being recorded and posted, we just ask that you try to limit the use of the chat feature in Zoom as much as possible so people that are watching later can understand what's going on. If you are joining us as a member of the public today and are not a part of the RAC, please remain muted and off camera until the end of the meeting. We have some time set aside at the end for public comment, and at that point we'll ask you to come off mute and come on camera and share your thoughts. If you are planning to provide public comment and you know that now, it would be great if you could just indicate that in the chat so we can make sure that we're allocating a sufficient amount of time for public comment at the end. And then finally, I just want to remind everyone that we have a rulemaking webpage. So if you're looking for any of the materials that we talk about today or a link to register for the next meeting, you can find it there. And I'm going to put that into the chat. I can find my chat box while I share my meeting. Here we go. All right. So let's go to introductions. So we're not going to do full introductions today because we have a lot to get through and we did it at the last meeting, but I do want to make sure that we take some time to introduce the RAC members that weren't at the last meeting so we can meet them. And if you want to remind yourself of who all is on the RAC, let me put the link to that in the chat. We have the rule roster or the RAC roster on our website as well. So for those of you that weren't at the last meeting, I'm just going to call on you and ask you to just introduce yourselves, your name, if you're representing an organization, and then any interest or experience you have with place-based planning. I'm going to go alphabetical by last name. So Donna Beveridge, I'll pick on you first, and then Mike Butner, I think just seeing who all is here. Tom Patty will be next, and then April Snell, and then Brian Wolcott. So Donna, if you are here, please introduce yourself. And like I said, talk about any experience or the experience you have with place-based planning.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Donna Beveridge. I'm a county commissioner from Union County. I was a convener for the place-based planning group at the Upper Grand Ronde. We were one of the first 4 that were in the pilot project and the first one to finish. And then we were also approved by the OWRD Commission later that year. And so now we're working on feasibility. And so this has been, I started 8 years ago, so it's been a long project, but anyway, it's been hopefully fruitful and we'll be getting some things implemented. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. Mike Butner, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi folks, Mike Bittner, Utilities Director for the City of Bend, here on the RAC representing Central Oregon Cities Organization. We're a bunch of cities here in Central Oregon that are always concerned about water and want to learn a little bit more about place-based planning, really where the state's at in this long evolution, and see how we may or may not be a part of it. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Tom Patty.
Thank you. Tom Patty, I'm with the State Drinking Water Program at Oregon Health Authority, groundwater coordinator. My previous experience with place-based planning was that I was on the review committee for the original projects that were scored and ranked and subsequently funded.
April.
Hello, April Snell, Executive Director with the Oregon Water Resources Congress, representing irrigation districts and similar agricultural water suppliers from around the state. We have been engaged and supportive of the originating place-based planning pilot program, as well as the new legislation, and our members have participated in some of the precursors to the place-based planning program, which primarily has been working with the Bureau of Reclamation's Basin Study Program, first in Hood River, second in Deschutes. And then I have monitored the place-based planning pilots. Thank you.
Thanks, April. And then last up is Brian.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Wolcott. I'm with the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. And I've at the OWEB, I manage the Water Acquisition Grant Program. I also coordinate the Watershed Council Capacity Program and the Soil and Water Conservation District Capacity Grant Programs. And I've been at OWEB for 2 years. Prior to that, I was with the Walla Walla Basin Watershed Council in Milton Free Water and worked for many years on water planning in Oregon and bi-state water planning with Washington. And it actually applied for place-based planning in the first round when place-based planning was offered, and was a runner-up in the Walla Walla Basin was in that first round of applications.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. We're glad to have you all with us today. And thank you for volunteering to serve on the RAC. So let's move on to the agenda for the day. We're going to start with a summary of the changes we made to the definitions, the draft rule definitions based on our discussion last month, and then wrap up our conversation that we started last month about grant types and eligibility. Then we'll move on to grant evaluation criteria and state recognition. We're going to plan on a short break around 1 o'clock. And if there's no public comment, we will go straight through to 2 o'clock. As always, the times on this agenda are estimates, and we will adapt to make sure that we're giving each topic enough time to capture your feedback. I'm going to just pause before we dive into content to see if there are any questions about the agenda or meeting protocols before we move on. Okay. I don't see any hands up. So let's keep her moving. Let's see. So I just want to start off our discussion with a moment of appreciation for all of your feedback so far. I was going through all of your comments. I was just really struck by how thoughtful and helpful everyone has been. So thank you for that, and for the time that you're dedicating to help us make these rules the best they can be. I'm going to start with a quick summary of the changes we made to the definitions. This was all summarized in the table we sent out 2 weeks ago that had a summary of your feedback from the last meeting and a description of how we considered that feedback. We also sent out a revised draft of the rules with the red line edits that were made as a result of that feedback. And both of those, if you didn't get the email, those are both available on our website as well. And I will put the links to those in the chat. I think that yeah, you should be able to grab them from there, but let me know if you have trouble. I'm going to go through the red line edits that we made to the definitions, and then open up for, we're going to go through all the definitions, and then we'll open up the discussion for any additional thoughts or feedback before we move on to the rest of the topics for today. So starting with the definition of the application review team and the plan review team. We heard last month that there might be value in having the option to include other entities that are not listed in statute who have relevant experience on those review teams. We also heard concern about opening up the review teams too broadly. So we added language here that allows WRD to invite other entities to join those review teams, but limits those entities to other state agencies. We also added a new definition for state agencies so that we were clear that a state agency includes things like regional solutions. So those are those edits. Then moving on, we made some changes to the definition of convener based on your feedback. We included in-stream and out-of-stream water interest to improve clarity about what a balanced representation of interest means. We also went through the draft place-based planning guidelines and looked at the RAC comments and pulled out some high-level roles of a convener. And we're hoping that this captures the role of the convener at the level that's appropriate for a role. And then we're planning to include more detail in the guidance about that role. We also added that the conveners should be impartial in their guidance and support of the planning and implementation processes. Next, we made some changes to the definition of collaborative. We again added the balanced representation of in-stream and out-of-stream water interests from the community for clarity, and added language here that defines a collaborative to have a shared governance agreement. And you just saw that we added the word community to the definition of collaborative, which was in part a response to some of the planning grant type discussion that we'll talk about in a minute. So we added a new definition for community here and tried to capture the content and themes of the working definition of community that was used in the state-supported regional water planning and management work group. And I'll just put a link to that in the chat as well, so you can see what that working definition from the report was, if you are interested. So knowing that those definitions were not written for use in rule, we just adapted the language so that we could use it in rule. And so the definition reads, community means the people impacted by the water resources of the planning area, entities with an interest or obligation relative to water and ecosystems in the planning area, and federal, state, local, and tribal governments. Moving on, we added language to the grant agreement definition to include a scope of work. It's pretty straightforward. And then similar to the definition of community, we added a definition for a planning area in response to feedback that we got during the grant types discussion, which we'll talk about again in a minute. The definition that we drafted for a planning area is that it means a shared hydrologic area that is within hydrologic and size limitations defined by the department. Okay, so that was a lot of information. I'm going to pause here because I know we have some new definitions from last time, and we've added some things to the definition. So I just wanted to pause and see if folks have additional feedback on these definitions before we sort of close the book on them for now. Yes, Kaylin.
Thanks, Lily. I had sent along by email some further suggestions for revisions to convener and community. And I'm curious if this is a time to discuss those proposals.
Yep, that would be a perfect time.
All right, let me pull up my notes. All right, the intent of these proposed revisions is to better align just a little bit more with the House Bill 5006 work group report. And on community, I would suggest that we add.
Actually have
Okay.
I have your suggestion on a slide.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you. How about we look at the slide here for a moment, and I can answer any questions folks might have.
So I think, Kaylin, your suggestion for community is to add in or downstream of the planning area to the definition of community. And I'll just say I think I'm interested to hear what other folks think about this edit. We considered it. I don't think we're necessarily against it. I wonder, when I was thinking about this, sort of where downstream ends and when if like the Columbia is a large basin, there's a lot of places that are downstream from a lot of other places that are very far away, and sort of where that impact would end. But does anybody else have any other comments on this suggestion from Kaylin?
This is Donna Beveridge. I like the suggestion. I think it's good.
Thanks, Mary. Lisa, did you have something about this edit?
I like the edit. I'd raise my hand for something else though.
Anybody else?
Yeah, this is Peggy. I'm
Yeah.
not interested. I'm puzzled by interest or obligation relative to water and ecosystems, because it says in the planning area, you're assuming that downstream doesn't count.
Peggy, I can answer that. My perspective was that in the planning area is relative to a discrete hydrologic area that's defined by the planning group. And so downstream of the planning area would be an area outside of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I took it as just downstream in that same, water basin. Because like somebody said, where does that stop? Is that 6 states away? So probably need to define that.
This is Debbie. I would think that interested parties downstream could be included with, that entities with an interest subject. That's not a subject. I don't know that downstream is really necessary. I think we could, if somebody downstream was interested, they could certainly be included just because they have an interest in what's happening in the planning area.
Annette, did you have your hand up for this?
I do. Yeah, I'm just wondering about upstream as well. If the planning group were to establish goals or flow targets or anything else for the planning area, any uses upstream might impact those communities' interests. I don't know how that would fit in here though.
April?
Yeah, so apologies for missing the first meeting, but my staff person was on here and I've read the notes, and I will say I'm really appreciative of how, Lily, you've approached the feedback you've got so far. It's made it easy for me to catch up, but I'm a little concerned with the amount of time that we have for these rules. And I was remiss in mentioning in my introduction that I did serve.
Oh, April, you just went on mute.
Weird, magically muted myself. I'm the only one that has that power, just so folks know. Can't mute me by accident. But I think having served on the regional planning work group, which was a very long process, I would urge us to recognize that report exists and there are things we can pull there, but there was a lot of stuff we didn't finalize as a group. And I guess in the vein of Kaylin's suggestion, and I assume there'll be other suggestions and feedback brought up, I'm hesitant to add in downstream for the reasons some folks have alluded to, as far as I think it would be included in the definition as is. And as you've pointed out, Lily, in the department's feedback on some of the other changes, the more you add to a definition, the more constraining it might end up being. I do like clarifying that we're talking about water resources and adding the second part of that. But I think that's my feedback on that, and I'll have more feedback on the other definitions as we go forward, and trying to keep them as simple as possible. And then where maybe there's guidance or guidelines, because I think that's where the regional planning report has a lot of things that we worked on as a group that hopefully can still be used. Like if you're wanting to do this, here are some ideas, suggestions, here are some different things. But for you guys administering what is a new now permanent fund, I think we need to be careful in how complicated we make the definitions. Thank you.
Thanks, April. Does anybody else have comments on this proposed revision of community? Okay. I think what we'll do, we'll take all your comments and feedback and make some revisions and let you know in the same way that we've done before. I'm going to go back to this slide, and then Lisa, I think you had your hand up next for the next piece.
Sure, yeah, thanks. I had two comments on the definitions. One was to suggest adding a definition of facilitator. And I think that final report for the House Bill 5006 work group suggested that. And, you know, because of course in these place-based planning processes, typically I think there's a convener, but then there's also a neutral facilitator. And that's another critical piece of this. So we might want to put a definition for facilitator. I think that's recommendation U in that work group report regarding a facilitator. And then my second comment was just on the application review team. You know, our preference would be to just stick with the state agencies listed in the statute and not broaden that out. I think it's also unclear the way that it's written. I think you said WRD would invite them. It doesn't actually say that. So our preference is to just keep the review team to the agencies that have expertise in in-stream and out-of-stream issues, which are already identified in the statute.
Thanks, Lisa. Does anybody have other comments on the application review team or the addition of a facilitator definition? Okay. Oh, Peggy.
So I guess I like the proposed definition where it broadens it, but I'm willing to listen to others.
Mike.
Hey, Lily, maybe just a question about process. So I support what Lisa had mentioned in terms of the facilitator, in terms of that addition or that definition. When you ask, are there other people that have comments? Do you want us to express, you know, agreement or disagreement with a comment, or do you just want us to lie in silence?
Yeah. If you expressing agreement would be great.
Okay. I really like the idea of that neutral facilitator being a little bit more well-defined in this process. Thanks.
And I'm seeing some thumbs up from other folks as well. Debbie, I just want to make sure, I think that your hand is up for a different topic, but I wanted to make sure.
It
I'm not
is.
ignoring you.
No,
Okay.
I mean, I have 2 points, I guess. One is I would also agree with Lisa's, the state agencies that are already outlined in statute. It is a cumbersome process already. Adding additional state agencies to review the overall plans and get comments on and address comments for just adds to the length and cost and effort required to get to the end point. So my recommendation would be leaving it at the ones in statute. And then my other is more just, I guess, question, when you say scope of work, like I envision something similar to how OWEB does grant agreements. They just put your application as an appendix and that serves as a scope of work. Is that what you're envisioning? Or is that outlined more clearly in guidelines? Just that seems like a simple way to address scope of work, but I wasn't sure if there was another vision that you guys had. Thanks.
Thanks, Debbie. I think Kim has an answer for you.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. How WRD generally does scopes of work is just to make sure that our grant agreements are legally sufficient. Is often like a short paragraph to describe what will happen, and then some very high level tasks and a budget. And we've shifted away from a task-based budget to a category-based budget based on feedback from our grantees. So that is just easier administratively in managing their funds. We also attach the application to the grant agreement, but we find it's better. Sometimes we need to refine the tasks and have clarity from the application stage to the grant agreement stage. So it's a separate attachment to the grant agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Kaylin, I think you had another item in your email that you had sent.
I think I had suggested in terms of convener, it was another edit to align it with the House Bill 5006 work group final report. And it suggested adding in the phrase are perceived as neutral after the word process. Also for clarity, I just suggest switching the commas to semicolons because there's just commas. There's a lot of commas in that sentence, but that's just stylistic. Thanks.
Thanks, Kaylin. Does anybody have thoughts on that, on adding neutral to the definition of convener?
Or specifically, is perceived to be neutral.
And just to remind folks, we have, this is what it looks like right now. So or wait, that's not it. There it is. We have that they impartially guide and support the planning and implementation. Yes, Peggy.
Okay, so you're suggesting that the convener is going to be neutral or perceived as neutral. I don't know what neutral is because I'm assuming that a person who wants to do this process frankly has a reason for wanting to have this process. And so I'm not sure I understand. The facilitator needs to be neutral, don't get me wrong, but I'm not really certain I understand how a convener can be perceived as neutral since they're really the instigator of this process. So again, happy to listen.
Thanks, Peggy. Donna?
Yeah, so, okay, so in our situation, as the county commissioner, I was the convener. And so, you know, like what we decided at the beginning when we put our MOU together is, you know, we want to make sure that we look at the in-stream and out of stream suggestions for projects, and that let's just say that a project was going to help fish. That was great. It couldn't harm cities or agriculture. If it was an agriculture project, then it couldn't harm fish or cities. So I'm saying that's a very high bar, but at the same time, most likely, if it's a county that's applied, instead of a specific person or group, you're gonna have more neutral. And then I have another question. Are you guys, so you're talking about a facilitator and a convener? Because in our case, I mean, how many people are we gonna be paying? I mean, I just did it as a commissioner, no extra pay, you know what I'm saying? It was part of my job. But I feel like maybe we're talking about paying somebody like a facilitator on top of that, which would take a lot of our money that we don't have. And in our case, we used Anderson and Perry. And but other groups, they changed and had different people coming all the time. You know, they were having an expert in this and an expert in that. So I don't really know if you guys are asking that they have a convener and a facilitator both. I just feel like that's gonna gobble up a lot of the money. I don't think they're gonna volunteer.
Thanks, Donna. Holly.
Yeah, thank you. Kaylin, thanks for bringing up that point about the definition of a convener. I do feel like I am thinking more like Peggy. I'm not sure that the word neutral and associating it with convener is super necessary, although I'm not going to fall on my sword about that if folks want to have neutral in there. And then I don't know if it was Debbie or Donna who just spoke about having a facilitator. I think the way I'm interpreting this is a facilitator is optional. Like the groups can choose to have a facilitator. Like for us in the Harney Basin, we have a neutral facilitator. We've had one the whole time that we've paid. And then the conveners are someone from the Watershed Council and someone from the county court. And those people are not paid. So the convener role is more of like voluntary, and the facilitator, I think, is somebody that you hire. That's how I'm interpreting it. But I don't think facilitator is like, you have to have a facilitator, but you do have to have a convener.
Thanks, Holly. Debbie, and then I think we'll try to wrap up this discussion.
Yeah, I'll try just real quick. We do have we have co-conveners, Herb with the Gillum SWCD and myself with the Watershed Council. And for us, that really means, you know, the people that are the conveners are the people that can or want to bring in the both sides or all the sides, all the interests. We work with landowners, we work with more environmentally leaning organizations. You know, we're wanting to find that shared goal. And that's our role. And we do also, the Lower John Day has had a facilitator. The person has changed over the years. But that's really been the person we lean on to hear all of the discussion and kind of put it all together into, you know, a shared voice or a collective voice, I guess is what I'm thinking of. I do get a little bit of the funding for my time as convener, but it's not a lot. The facilitator, of course, is paid. So and that, yeah, we definitely expect that facilitator to be completely neutral. But the convener needs to be a person that people can see, or the other organizations can see, as not being one-sided or the other, just being able to work with multiple entities, multiple viewpoints. Thanks.
Thanks for that perspective, Debbie. April.
Sorry, I'm having some problems with my AV. So I think, again, trying to get back in the headspace of all this. So I think this may be an area where trying to differentiate between the rules that you guys need in order to administer and implement this program versus the guidelines that entities would use in going forward with this effort. So I think that I don't have specific on the convener that's up before us, but I think the more we can avoid terminology that is subjective in the rules themselves, the better off this program will operate. Whereas the guidelines, I think that is more appropriate for giving examples and, for example, the inclusion of the perceived as neutral. Perception is highly subjective. And so I think that part would be one that we would want to avoid. But then, giving more in the guidance to help people. And I also think this conversation that folks were just having about the difference between a convener and a facilitator, and acknowledging that some folks or some efforts may choose to have a facilitator or not, that may be something that needs to be flushed out a little bit more in the guidance. So I just want to flag that I think that's valuable and may need to be added into the guidelines a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks, April. Thanks everyone for that discussion. We, as we did before, we will take all of your comments and feedback and figure out how we want to include them and consider them in updating the draft rules. So is there I think, sounds like we're done with convener. Is there anything else in the definitions that we need to talk about? Okay. So let's move on to grant eligibility. And we started this discussion last month. And just as a reminder, this section of the rules outlines the what can be considered for funding and what can't. Applicants can use these descriptions to understand whether they would qualify for funding under this grant program. We heard that the title for this section was confusing, and we agreed. So we changed the title to eligible grant types from grant eligibility, just to be more descriptive of what was actually in this section. We also heard that the rules were confusing in how they related to the supported actions outlined in statute. So we added some clarifying language to say that the fund may fund the costs of any action supporting place-based integrated water resources planning as outlined in statute through the administration of pre-planning grants, planning grants, implementation coordination grants, and plan update grants. And to help understand how these grant types and supported actions fit together, I wanted to just go through the supported actions from statute. So the fund can support the costs of actions, including filling gaps in capacity, knowledge, and skill sets, developing data and analysis tailored to the area of the place-based plan, and assessing critical issues within the planning area. It can also support building knowledge and relationships, assisting groups with preparing or assessing readiness to engage in relevant planning, building community capacity, facilitation and management of a planning collaborative, developing a place-based plan, facilitating public participation, updating a plan, and implementation coordination. And so hopefully you can see that some of these actions are related to specific grant types. For example, J and K on this slide are actions that would be supported only by the plan update grant type or implementation coordination grant type. But there are also actions that can be supported in multiple grant types. For example, I on this slide, facilitating public participation could be supported for any of the grant types. So I just wanted to emphasize this here because we realized that the naming of the capacity building grant type was confusing because it is an eligible cost. It's one of the supported actions of the fund and can be done under any of the grant types. So we changed the name to pre-planning to be more accurate to what this grant type is, which is supporting this initial phase of planning where a community is figuring out what they need to do to be ready to plan and then getting ready to plan. A lot of this might be capacity building, but it can also include other actions as well. And then we also just wanted to be clear about the who and where and throughout the rest of here and throughout the rest of the grant types. So we added community and planning area to this definition. So I just wanted to pause here to note that we don't love the word pre-planning or the terminology pre-planning for this grant type, but it's sort of the best we could come up with. So I just wanted to throw it out to all of you with all of your brain power to see if anybody had other ideas for potential language we could use for this grant type. Or if you like this language, we can keep it. Just thought I'd try to harness your collective brain power here.
The one thing that came to my mind was community engagement, but I'm not sure that really encompasses everything in and of itself.
And I think we might run into the same problem with that one as capacity building, where it's one of those things that multiple grant types will do is community engagement. Yeah, April.
So, question for you guys, the department. So for this specific activity, what would be eligible would be something that would be specifically assessing the community's ability to go forward with a place-based plan, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe this may be an area where additional language would be helpful, especially if you guys aren't fond of it. And so maybe something that actually acknowledges that it's a pre-planning assessment or something that incorporates that term or that concept in there, because I think otherwise folks may look at it and think that there's other types of pre-planning activities that might fit into that. Unless there is the intent that there could be some other things like community engagement, or I was reading the comments about the capacity building, so I understand why you guys got to the pre-planning. I think pre-planning can work, but it also seems like it might be better to be more focused if there's only going to be that assessment component that's eligible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, April. I think what we have now is that it would include some of those other activities like that groups might need to get ready to plan on a sort of limited basis, but it wouldn't just be like, let's do a checklist and see if we're ready, but it would be like, what do we need to do to get ready? And are there some community engagement that we can do now or capacity building we can do now to get ready to plan? Tom.
Yeah, I'd just throw out the term readiness assessment as a possibility.
So maybe adding just a little bit more, like April suggested, adding some more language in the title to be more descriptive.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, if anybody has any brainstorms in the next week or so, please don't hesitate to email me and let me know. Let's keep moving. So let's move on to eligible planning grants. So we realized that the language here was different than for the other grant types, which are more process and outcome based. So we removed B and C, like the more confusing language, and captured those concepts in the newly defined planning area and community. You don't see the word community used in this section, but just to remind you, it is referenced in the new definition of collaborative, and collaborative is used in this description. We also added a requirement for a shared governance agreement based on the conversation we had around the definition for collaborative. And then finally, we didn't really get to talk about either the implementation coordination grants or plan update grants last month. So I wanted to throw them up here again, just to remind us what the draft rules say about them. Eligible implementation coordination grants must support the implementation of a state recognized place-based integrated water resources plan, and eligible plan updates must support updates to the state recognized place-based integrated water resources plan. So I'm just going to pause here and give us some room to finish the discussion we had last month and open the floor for any comments or feedback on these eligible grant types. Are they the appropriate grant types to offer? Are the eligibility, are the descriptions accurate? Is there anything missing? And see, Holly, I see your hand is up.
Thank you, Lily. Question on number 3, the eligible implementation coordination grants. That in the rules, it says these must support the implementation of a state recognized place-based integrated water resources plan. So implementation of the strategies in the place-based plans, like what does that mean exactly? And implementation coordination to me sounds like that is to be spent on support for implementing strategies, things like that. But I think I've interpreted that the department doesn't want to necessarily pay for or fund supporting roles for groups with this type of grant. But how can you implement a strategy without supporting roles?
So I think, but let me know if you want to jump in here, Kim, but the idea behind it is sort of like, we can't fund projects for implementation, but what we can fund is sort of the project management, continuing to have collaboratives meet through implementation, and sort of all of that like coordination that happens. That's not project implementation, but keeping the group together and keeping that coordination happening between all of the collaborative members through implementation.
And what I'm hearing from you, Holly, is perhaps that's missing and not clear just in this text in the rule, because it really says implementation of a state recognized plan. So
right. And then another question, so this is kind of confusing because implementation, like plan adoption and implementation is the like step 5, that's the last step. But what I'm hearing is this number 3 is supposed to support steps, to keep things moving, which is technically like not step 5. So not the implementation part.
So I think all of that can happen in the planning grant as well. That's like, so that all of that coordination is happening during planning as well. And then this is like, after you're done planning and you have a state recognized plan, some of that coordination needs to continue to happen. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I do think that this language needs to be updated to better reflect that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You do that. Anything else? I see thumbs up from Peggy. Thank you, Peggy. Okay. Not seeing anybody else. So let's move on. That's great. Okay. I think we're on schedule, which is always exciting. Okay, let's start our conversation around grant evaluation criteria. So this section of the draft rules is what the department will use to guide the application review team in evaluating grant applications. So it's really important for these criteria to be clear and understandable. Just as a reminder, these draft rules relate to the statute 537-873-11D, which says that the commission may adopt rules to implement this section, including rules that prioritize the issuance of funding for purposes described in this section and establish a system for scoring and ranking projects that includes consideration of groups' readiness for planning and projects' alignment with strategic priorities determined by state water laws and relevant state agencies. For the most part, this section mirrors the grant type section we just finished talking about, with evaluation criteria laid out for each grant type. I'll go through what the draft rules say, explain some of our reasoning for them, and then we'll open up the discussion for the section. So the section starts with evaluation criteria for pre-planning grants, name to be determined, but pre-planning grants for now. The draft rules state that pre-planning grants should be evaluated on the expected ability of the grantee to effectively engage a balance of in-stream and out-of-stream water interests on place-based water resources issues, the clear and immediate need for capacity to be built, and cost effectiveness. I think A is pretty self-explanatory. It speaks to the likelihood of a given grantee to be able to engage their community and bring a diverse group of water interests together. B, we added because there might be places that are further down the planning path and don't need to do this piece before they start planning. And then similar to the change in the name of this grant type, we might need to adjust the language here around capacity building. And then C, cost effectiveness is something we used, or we saw used in other grant opportunities that we were looking at. And we added it here because we've heard from grant review teams that it would be nice to have a way to consider the cost of a grant application when scoring them. So in other words, if a group can accomplish similar goals for less money, should it score higher? And you'll see this sort of evaluation criteria in each of the different grant type evaluation metrics. Moving on to the evaluation criteria for the planning grant type. When drafting this language, we looked at the state-supported regional water planning and management work group recommendation K, which said that place-based planning grant selection should be based on established criteria that consider planning group readiness and align with strategic priorities determined by the state. With that in mind, we dropped the draft rule evaluation criteria for planning are that planning grants shall be evaluated on first, a collaborative's readiness to engage in planning, which includes but is not limited to the convener and collaborative members' ability to meaningfully engage and collaborate with a balanced representation of in-stream and out-of-stream water interests, the public, and state agencies, the history of collaboration in the planning area and among collaborative members, the proposed data, technical information, and planning tools that would support planning in the area, and the proposed engagement of environmental justice communities. In addition to a collaborative's readiness to engage in planning, planning grants should also be evaluated on cost effectiveness, strategic priorities determined by the director, and the value of place-based integrated water resources planning in the planning area, and the demonstration of a clear and immediate need for a plan. Peggy, did you have something you wanted to?
Yeah, I just want to move a big C up as close as possible. So I certainly would switch B and C around to emphasize that unless you have the data, it's less than a successful process. And then my second comment is the history of collaboration. So if you don't have a history of having worked together, you're going to be marked down on the ability to get this grant. And yet, so does that mean you better get a pre-planning grant first, or you're not likely to get an actual grant? Anyway, those are my sort of general comments.
Thanks, Peggy. Maybe I was planning to go through all of the draft rules first, but maybe we should just pause here and focus on pre-planning and planning, and then we can move on to the next implementation coordination and plan updates. So let's pause and let's talk about pre-planning and planning, what we've heard so far. Lauren.
So if you go back a page, and these two, you talk about engaging with state agencies, environmental justice communities, in-stream and out-of-stream interests. Where would, I think just right here is where I think it might be worthwhile having something about how they're engaging with the local elected, so your counties and your cities, because I feel like the engagement of your local elected officials aren't there here, and they're definitely part of your community here and should probably be involved. And there is nothing here to evaluate the place-based plans connection with their local community in that respect.
So maybe adding in
So
the,
I see the public, but I mean,
yeah,
I mean,
maybe
you talk
adding
about
that
agents, state
specifically.
agencies specifically, and so I think maybe your local elected officials might want to be called out there.
Thanks, Lauren. Holly.
Thanks, Lily. Yeah, I wanted to piggyback off of what Peggy said, to a capital B, the history of collaboration in the planning area. This is one that I've always gotten hung up on, in grants. I think that it might be better, for communities if we think about this planning fund as an opportunity to enhance collaboration in the area. And, you know, maybe instead of writing it this way, we could phrase it as like, how will this collaboration benefit the area, or like something like that. And then people that are applying to this grant have the opportunity to say how collaboration has happened historically, but I think it's also meaningful to talk about how this is going to help further or enhance collaboration in the future in that area.
Thanks, Holly. Debbie.
I think what Holly said is kind of sound. I would say to Peggy's question about the pre-planning grant, you know, some areas do already have large scale collaborative efforts happening, like the John Day, and this, for example, is just kind of an offshoot of some of that with some additional partners. So I don't think that's 100% necessary. But I also have a comment that I feel like the big C, the proposed data, technical information, and planning tools, should maybe be on the same level as the little A, B, and C and D. I'm not sure that is. I feel like that should be called out separately than under the collaborative's readiness to engage in planning. I think it's slightly related, but I think it maybe needs a little bit more weightiness on its own. Thanks.
Thanks, Debbie. Lisa.
I think you just said my name.
Yeah.
I can't quite hear you. I wonder if we should add something in either in the application requirements or the evaluation criteria, again, just on this really important point on like a commitment to running a neutral process, which we have sort of in the convener definition, but it doesn't seem to carry down to the application. I think we want, you know, yeah, I think that would be an important piece of any application to describe the commitment and how, you know, how it would be done, how they would commit and actually implement a neutral process.
I'm seeing some thumbs up for that as well. Thanks, Lisa. Peggy.
So I want to go back to the data comment, and I liked what I just heard a moment ago. We know from our past experiences that unless the data is available for these collaborative processes, that they are not going to be successful. And so there has to be, it really does need to be raised to as high a level as possible, because otherwise the collaboratives spin their wheels trying to fight over what is right, what is true, what is the real data. And so somehow or another, we need to raise that to as high a level as possible.
Thanks, Peggy. Anything else about, oh, yeah, Debbie, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, just one more thing. I think you know, that what data is available is super important, but one of the values of our process was identifying what's missing. And it is a lot, you know, and certain areas have more that's missing than others. But I think having as much possible knowledge of what we do have available will set groups out on the right path. But what's missing is a valuable learning experience in the process as well.
A good point. Holly.
Thank you. Sorry, one more thing. That the proposed data, technical information, that point that we're on, is this suggesting that if an area or a place is data sparse, that they will score lower on the evaluation?
I think, yeah, so it's like it would be that they are less ready to plan than other places that have more data.
Is there a current pathway for places that are data sparse to get more data, to like highlight that?
Yeah, I think that might be a part of that like pre-planning piece, right? Like you could engage in pre-planning and kind of understand where your data, where you need more data to engage in effective planning, or if you have the right data to engage in effective planning. And that's part of the reason why that piece is important.
So I think it'd be helpful to carry that up into the evaluation criteria for the capacity building grants then. Like if there's, maybe that's getting too in the weeds, but I think it's important for people to know that like the Harney Basin was super data sparse until like 2 years ago. But that doesn't mean that that place, I know that this isn't trying to suggest that a place that's data sparse isn't important, but it could be perceived that way. So I think adding clarity would be helpful around that.
Thanks, Holly. Peggy, did you have something to add?
Yeah, no, so I guess that's my point, is that if we don't have, if a group does not have the data, then planning is going to be almost impossible to do. So that's what the pre-planning is for. And that's what we have all been pushing for, is to make sure that we have that step, that pre-planning step. What is it that's needed? What's missing? Can the agencies provide that information? If not, let's go find the money to get that data so that any kind of a planning opportunity is successful. And I think that's the point that at least I'm trying to make. And I think that Holly's comments are right on, that certainly we don't want to exclude somebody from doing planning, but that's the reason that Harney has taken longer than it might have taken had they actually had the data in the first place. So anyway, thanks.
Thanks, Peggy. Is there anything else that people want to talk about in regards to the evaluation criteria for planning or pre-planning? Okay. Let's take a 5-minute break before we move on. So let's come back at 1:12. Thanks, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. I give people an extra minute just because I can't tell if everyone's back yet. Peggy, you have your hand up.
I do. As you begin talking about this implementation draft rules, I'm having a problem with the word implementation and explaining to the general public that you're talking about, you're still doing planning stuff. You're not doing the actual project stuff. And that there's a difference between these kinds of grants and project grants. And somehow or another, there needs to be some sort of clarity. I mean, I understand, but somehow or another, I think there needs to be some sort of clarity so that everybody understands better that you're not talking about actually doing a project, but you're still working on doing planning to get there, or during the projects, you're making sure that they're working correctly or whatever.
So maybe just like more clearly defining what implementation coordination means and like what are like the sort of activities under that granting.
And what they aren't. I guess that's the other part. It's not only what they are, but what they aren't.
Kaylin?
I totally agree with that. I know that implementation and implementation coordination in this context doesn't mean paying for projects, but I can see potential grantees and applicants not seeing that distinction from what's here. So if it's, I mean, perhaps it's adding in another definition for what implementation coordination is, since it is kind of a special beast. Same thing if we're going to use, pre-planning, what specifically is that and what is it not, to use, I think, Peggy's framing.
Thanks, Kaylin. Lisa, sorry.
Yeah, I agree with that
Okay.
as well. But I also had another comment, which is, and I can try and provide some language on this, but under B and C, where it's pursuit of a plan, I think we need some language in there, like maybe under C, progress made towards plan implementation. That includes both in-stream and out-of-stream actions or something. In other words, you have a plan that includes both in-stream and out-of-stream strategies, as we call them in Harney. But we want to make sure that, things move forward together. In other words, the actual implementation of the plan achieves both in-stream and out-of-stream. Not just that you have a plan that includes both of those and you're sort of implementing the plan, but you may be implementing the plan, like only the in-stream actions or, only the out-of-stream. So, I mean, just some language that clarifies that we really do mean on the substance and the results, we're having a balanced set of actions moving forward.
Thanks, Lisa. Kate?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I would underline what Lisa just said, and I also agree with a little more specificity on what implementation coordination is, maybe some examples like writing grants for implementation or choosing project, whatever those things are envisioned to be. But my question is on 3A and why, just the rationale, because we're thinking like even 7 years after a plan is recognized, it's still going to be as important to do those projects. I'm just wondering why the preference for the more recently recognized plans.
Yeah, that's a great question, Kate. So when we drafted this, the reason we put that in there was we were thinking that groups that more recently got state recognized are probably going to need the support to get implementation off the ground more than other groups in a resource constrained environment. So groups that have been working together for multiple years implementing, and not to say that they would not be eligible for this grant, they're certainly eligible, but just that there might be some extra points given to groups that are more newly formed and need that extra support. I don't know if that makes sense to folks, but that's what we were thinking when we drafted that bullet. Debbie.
I guess I see where we could add a little bit of description in the grant eligibility type section, to be a little bit more clear on what implementation coordination could mean. But I also wanted to speak to the in-stream versus out-of-stream. And I think I would suggest leaving some not wiggle room is not the right word, but some allowance for the individual planning groups, depending on what their what they have identified as their place-based priorities, and approved by the state commission for approval. You might, in those first couple 3 years, you might only see an out of stream implementation projects implemented for out of stream, but that doesn't mean in stream isn't important, or vice versa. But if they have identified the highest priority projects as being XYZ, that it doesn't meet necessarily both definitions or both purposes, that might be, if we're approving that grant, leaving that or if we're approving that plan, leaving that plan to be the deciding factor on what, if we're making implementation progress, what that actually looks like is up to the plan. I'm fumbling over that, but I hope that's somewhat understandable.
Thanks, Debbie. April.
Thanks. So, again, kind of going back to the conversations of the planning group and then discussion during the legislation, I think this is one of the more challenging areas to come up with rules based on what we were given. And I don't necessarily agree with it, but where we're at in regards to the regional planning group and the authorizing legislation is that implementation, and I say that with quotes around it, is very specific to, these grants are not going to pay for any aspect of the plan itself being implemented. And I think that's something that, while again, I don't necessarily agree with that, that is where we ended up. So I think it needs to, this idea that someone could apply for a grant that helps move the plan forward and helps presumably this involves coordinating with various in-stream, out-of-stream interests and the various stakeholders who are interested and involved in the plan. And I think out of things, this is one of the more nebulous of, well, what is that? Is it a communications plan? Is it having more meetings? Things like that. But I think there needs to be a little bit of distinction there. And I appreciate Kim putting into the chat what this means, because I think there's going to be some folks, just based on progress towards plan implementation, that should be something that is clarified, and maybe that's more in guidance. But I think having it up front that you can't get money to help you actually implement the plan, but you can get the funds to help move those things forward. And I also am stumbling over my words, but I think this is a bit more challenging because it's that coordination aspect and communication, and the word implementation, I think, kind of confuses things a little bit. So I don't have a suggestion on how to fix that, but I think that's one that both we need to keep in mind, that this is not about implementing the plan itself so much as the coordination, the communication, keeping people on board. And then also lastly, I will also say, and I can't remember who brought it up, I do have a little bit of concern about prioritizing collaboratives that have more recently received state recognition, because I think without this is a new program that just seems overly restrictive. So, thank you.
Thanks, April. Debbie.
One other comment I would make that, and maybe it would be covered more deeply in guidelines instead, would be how do you measure a commitment to collaboration in under the B section there? Just not sure if we have some examples, or and not necessarily for the rules, I guess, like I said, if it goes in the guidance, you know, what does commitment to collaboration look like? And I would also caution or express concern that these are weighty collaboratives to keep going. That's a lot of people, a lot of coordination. And if we aren't supported by grant dollars to help even quarterly or twice a year meetings, that could be something that falls by the wayside. And then does that mean we have no commitment to collaboration? I'm not sure, but just thoughts and questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Debbie. Mike.
Yeah, hi Lily. I was curious about the cost effectiveness bullet. Could you elaborate on that just a little bit more? Are you looking at, the grant award versus the outcome, or what specifically are you looking at in cost effectiveness?
What a good question. So I think when we put that together, we have it in each of the bullets. We saw it used in other grant types, and we did hear from grant review teams that it would be nice to be able to sort of say this grant, this application is making more effective use of the dollars that it's given than this other one. And we want to take that into consideration when we're looking at their applications. So that's really the thought behind it. We don't have this in our grant program, so we haven't done it for our application reviews teams to this point.
Okay, that makes sense. I think when we get to the final product here, I think just having some clarity on exactly what you're looking for would be helpful, just because grant writers are really in tune to cost effectiveness and the different inputs there. So thank you though.
Thanks, Mike. Danette.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the word implementation, if that's going to be confusing. And if we now have a pre-planning and a planning, can this one be post recognition grant type or something with a different name?
Like related to the planning process, as opposed to like keeping that language along the way.
Yeah, I just agree that implementation is going to confuse people because that makes it project ready, shovel ready, but it's not.
Thanks, Danette. Debbie.
I think that's a great idea, actually. Something, post recognition or post planning type coordination might be a little bit more clear. And then I also wanted to just make a comment about cost effectiveness. However that turns out to look. Obviously, this was a much longer, more intensive process than we had originally anticipated with the original pilots. And so I would caution awarding grants that maybe aren't fully, maybe don't ask as much, promise more, but don't ask as much, with the fear that maybe they are going to run out of money before the process is done. Thanks.
Thanks, Debbie. Anything else on implementation before we move on to plan updates? All right. I did just want to, I know we had going back a topic, we had some comments in the chat during the break. So I just wanted to call those out. Holly asked if a group is awarded a pre-planning grant and they go through the process to become ready for place-based planning. Is there a pathway for that group to receive a planning grant? Or if they get a pre-planning grant and successfully complete pre-planning, will they be evaluated differently for a planning grant? And Peggy responded, one would hope that provides extra points for getting the actual planning grant. So I think the pre-planning grant would help them get ready and be successful for the planning grant. Okay, let's move on to plan updates, evaluation criteria. These are really similar to the implementation coordination eligibility criteria, with preference given to the groups that are doing well and are more cost effective. And then in addition, the grant type would be evaluated on the demonstration of a need to update the plan or develop new planning strategies, or a demonstration of significant changes in local conditions, data availability, or climate change information that would impact the plan. So I'll pause there and see if anybody has comments on this grant type evaluation metrics. Okay. So then moving on, seeing no comments, when we were drafting these rules, we thought about the future, and we know that we know a lot about the planning phase and what success looks like because we've had the pilot program, and we know a little bit less about pre-planning and implementation and plan updates. And so because of this uncertainty, we added this additional section under grant evaluation criteria that allows additional evaluation criteria to be added by the Water Resources Commission to reflect lessons learned by the department through the administration of the grant program. Does anybody have any feedback on this section? Yes, Peggy.
So I'm trying to figure out where in this document we can at least mention that there are feasibility grants and that there are project grants things. And I don't, seeing this sentence or this section made me think maybe there needs to be a 6 that just recognizes or mentions the existence of these other actual grants that actually get things done.
Kim?
Yeah, thanks, Peggy. I wonder if in that providing clarification of what implementation coordination is and what it is not, that might be a space to, to point out it is not funding the investigation of feasibility or implementation of water projects, and then we could reference the other programs there.
Works for me. I just think it needs to be somewhere.
8.
I like this addition. I guess the thing I've been thinking in the back of my head this whole time, I'm good with the 4 categories and breaking it out that way, but our experience in the Deschutes is that we're always implementing and always planning. And so there are some gray areas. And so I think leaving this in there, maybe it becomes more clear what that coordination around implementation piece is as we have some more experience. I think this is a good way to handle that.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, it's definitely, always planning, always implementing. Anything else? Debbie.
I would ditto that for the John Day. We're always doing something. I think where it would be helpful funding wise for us would be taking those funds and being able to connect what is being implemented to our plans and vice versa. Making sure our plans are being used in the planning of projects and directions that larger collaborative is going.
Thanks, Debbie. Anything else on grant evaluation criteria before we move on to state recognition? Okay. I see, Steve, in the chat you asked, 5 implies commission discretion outside of additional rulemaking, such as by motion of the commission. Yes, that's what it would be. Okay, let's move on to, we did this already. We discussed it along the way, so we don't need to, I can skip this slide. Let's move on to state recognition with our remaining time today. As you already seen, this is an important part of planning. Having a state recognized plan qualifies groups for the two of the grant types that we've been talking about, and it lends credibility to a place-based plan. And all of our place-based planning groups in the pilot have pursued state recognition because of the value that it provides. So to start off, I just wanted to remind everyone of what's in statute for the definition of a state recognized plan. It means a place-based integrated water resources plan that has been reviewed by the Water Resources Commission and recognized by a commission resolution stating that the completed place-based integrated water resources plan adheres to applicable requirements. In the draft rules, as they are now, there are two sort of main components in the state recognition section. There is how we, and that's I think how I'd like to structure our discussion today. So the first part is the process by which a plan achieves and maintains state recognition. And then the second part is related to like, what does state recognition mean, both in terms of agency support for state recognized plans, and then how plans should be considered in the state's integrated water resources strategy. So let's start with process. As a reminder, the statute says that the commission may adopt rules to implement the section, including rules that establish criteria and a process for state recognition of place-based integrated water resources plan. And the commission may adopt rules that establish reporting and other requirements necessary to maintain the status of a state recognized place-based plan, including requirements concerning progress on implementing a place-based plan, how strategies and actions outlined in the plan must continue to represent a balance of in-stream and out-of-stream water interests, how the planning process continues to demonstrate a commitment to collaboration and adherence to principles of place-based integrated water resources planning and the integrated water resources strategy. And then the state-supported regional water planning and management work group made a recommendation about the process for state recognition, recommendation F, which recommended that to maintain state recognition and access to associated resources, all planning groups should be required to complete biennial reports to the Water Resources Commission that demonstrate their progress on implementation and that their pursuit of plan strategies and actions continue to represent a balance of in-stream and out-of-stream water interests and a commitment to collaboration and place-based planning principles. The place-based planning independent evaluation had some information around this, with survey respondents stressing the importance of retaining a balance of water interests during implementation and the importance of accountability towards achieving plan actions. Respondents also mentioned progress reports and pairing resources with accountability mechanisms. So taking all that into consideration, the department drafted 4 parts for the draft rules related to the process around state recognition. The first 3 relate to how state recognition is achieved and largely reflect the process used during the pilot phase for state recognition. So a collaborative is eligible to apply for state recognition of their plan after it is adopted by the collaborative through consensus as defined in the collaborative's governance agreement. The plan review team shall review the plan according to the evaluation metrics provided by the department and make a recommendation to the director about state recognition of the plan within 120 days of plan submission. And then a plan may be recognized by the commission if it meets the definition of a place-based integrated water resources plan as defined in statute and upon recommendation of the director, by the director. And then the 4th part is related to the maintenance of state recognition, and that is to maintain plan state recognition. The collaborative must submit biennial reports on progress made towards plan implementation on a form provided by the department. Plans may lose state recognition if reporting requirements are not met. Reporting or other information received by the department indicates that implementation does not represent a balance of in-stream and out-of-stream water interests, or the collaborative is no longer demonstrating a commitment to collaboration and adherence to the principles of place-based integrated water resources planning and the state's IWRS. So let's pause there and talk about process for state recognition. Are the rules clear? Do they make sense? Are there pieces that we should consider adding, removing? generally, what are your thoughts on what is in the draft rules for the process related to state recognition? Holly.
If a group gets consensus on their plan, goes through the state agency review process, and that process, they don't give the stamp of approval. In the rules, do we need to outline that that is an opportunity to improve the plan, and that collaboratives can resubmit to the state agency review team? I don't know if that's appropriate for the rules, or maybe that's something that's guidance. I think that could be helpful.
Yeah. Thanks, Holly. Lisa.
Are we talking about this whole rule section or just 1 through 4?
Just 1 through 4.
Okay.
And we'll get to the, what does it mean in a second. Anything else on process? Debbie.
Kind of similar to what I mentioned before, you know, how do you define a commitment to collaboration? And, you know, the principles, adherence to the principles. What does that actually look like if we're having annual meetings? Is that sufficient? Or yeah, I guess, and like I said, that could be in guidance instead of the rules, but I'd like to know exactly what's expected of us.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Debbie. Holly.
Sorry. Okay, on number 3 for this one, plan may be recognized by the commission if it meets the definition and upon recommendation by the director. All the pilot groups also had to provide presentations to the commission as well on their plans. Is that something that the department is wanting to carry forward with these new groups that are coming out? I think it's important to make those, if that is going to be a requirement, to make that expectation very clear up front, that you need to go through, you need to get consensus, then you need to get approval by the state agency review team, then you need to get acceptance by the director, then you need to present to the commission, then the commission chooses to say yes or no.
Okay. Thanks, Holly. Yeah, I'm not sure if we have not talked about them. So thank you. Anything else related to process? Not seeing anything. Let's move on to what does it mean? So we'll start with, I'm just going to go through the rules, what it means for agency support. And I'll start with the related statute and then work group recommendations before we get into the draft rules like before. So the related statute is that the commission may adopt rules that describe how the implementation of actions outlined in state recognized place-based integrated water resources plan may be considered and supported. The state-supported regional water planning and management work group also had a recommendation around this, stating that having a state recognized plan should provide planning groups agency support through coordination by the water core team or other appropriate groups to examine potential actions, incentives, or strategies that would advance the implementation of plans within each agency's mission and priorities. And so considering these recommendations, we drafted this language related to agency support. The department, in consultation with other relevant state agencies, shall support implementation of state recognized plans appropriate to their mission, authorities, and priorities as capacity allows. And then I'm just going to do the IWRS intro as well, and then we can talk about it all together. There's related statute, the Water Resources Commission shall consider state recognized place-based integrated water resources plan when updating the IWRS. The state-supported regional water planning and management work group made a similar recommendation pointing towards identifying common themes across basins that could help inform updates to the IWRS. And we wanted to make rules around this to just help clarify what consider means in this context, keeping in mind that the structure for the IWRS has evolved and will likely continue to do so. So given that, and creating some flexibility around that, we drafted the following language: plans that achieve state recognition before the department begins updating the IWRS shall be considered in the following ways. The department may identify and incorporate common themes emerging from state recognized plans into updates, and agencies may incorporate strategies from state recognized plans into the IWRS and any associated work plans appropriate to each agency's mission, authorities, priorities, and as capacity allows. Okay, I will pause here to open the floor for discussion on what does a plan mean. And I see Debbie has her hand up.
Sorry, I did want to go back just to
Yeah.
the other section, just real briefly to reiterate the in-stream, the balance of in-stream and out-of-stream water interests. And like I said, that could be more guidance document than this, but you know, some in-stream projects can take 3 or 4 years of planning before they're actually implemented, and a balance of in-stream and out-of-stream water interests might not be a one-to-one project type picture. Just want to be clear that some things are yeah. What were the highest priorities identified in the plan, I think, are maybe a better guide as to what actual implementation is going to look like. Thanks.
Thanks, Debbie. Does anybody have a response to that comment before we move on to what a plan means? I can't, April or Lisa, if you do have a response, just speak up otherwise.
Okay, my hand's up for this next thing, but yeah, I do have a response to that, which is, yeah, I think we can work on the wording. I appreciate that these things have different timelines, as Debbie's explaining, but I do think we want to ensure that the package moving forward is balanced, because that is the sort of overarching, part of the overarching structure of these plans and requirements of these plans. So we just want to make sure that both of those, all the needs are being addressed. So I think we can work on language around the timing, but I think we do want the substance to, the requirements for the substance to be, balanced.
I agree totally. It's just that 2-year, I guess I'm looking at that limitation of the 2-year reports, and just making sure that when you are looking at a 2-year timeline, you're not seeing the full picture, I guess, is where I'm trying to go with that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could put stuff in there about the steps being taken to implement.
Yeah, completely.
Something like that, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. Yes, April.
So I had my hand raised for the slide before this, but just on this topic, I think something that might help clarify in the rules under the state recognition of plans related to reporting or other information received by the department that indicates implementation does not represent a balance of in-stream and out-of-stream water interests. I think, as has been highlighted in previous conversations, this could go both to in-stream or out-of-stream interests, and I think that's important to recognize. But something that might help here is in that 4B statement, implementation of the plan, because I think that's also something to be specific to, is that for reporting purposes, the report should be specific to the plan components. And so if someone gets disgruntled or was not part of the process and then wants to allege certain activities weren't in alignment, I think it would be helpful to again be reflecting that this is implementation of the plan that was part of the collaborative that had all of these components that were balanced in nature, as opposed to something that might be more subjective, if that makes sense. And then if you could go to the slide that was right before that. Oh, okay, maybe that wasn't the one it is. It was, the comment was about how this lines up with where the IWRS is and whether or not, there we go. So plans that achieve state recognition before the department begins updating the state's integrated water resources strategy shall be considered in the following ways. The statement there under 6, I think, needs to be clarified a little bit, because as I think a number of my colleagues are aware, the IWRS is not a stagnant document. It is updated. Now we have, 8 years instead of 5 years. And so I think there needs to be some spatial limit or something that recognizes that, I guess, depending on where you guys were trying to go with that, plans that achieve state recognition before the last update or the most recent update, or something that is specific to that this plan happened when let's say the plan is related to where the IWRS is right now versus an IWRS that may be updated several years from now. So I don't know if I explained that, but I think that statement there could get confusing because it's not specific to which IWRS update, if that makes sense. You're muted, Lily.
What am I even doing here? Okay. Yes, so I can give a little bit of context for when we were drafting the rule. We were trying to show that we will, like, there's a sort of end date to when we can consider state recognized plans, right? So like for the next update of the IWRS, we can consider plans up until we start that process for updating. And so I wonder if it's just adding like updating the next states, or like some indication that it's for the next IWRS. Would that be?
I think that would be perfect, because I get it. What you're getting at there is that you can't incorporate strategies into the next IWRS that come out when you guys are in the middle of updating it. So that makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks, April. Lisa.
Yeah, I have 3 comments here. The first one is in 5. We do not support the language that says the department, in consultation with other agencies, shall support implementation of the state recognized plans. I think it's, that's really not what was intended by these statutes and this planning process. I think it's also unclear what it means. And as we know, in these place-based plans, we can have sort of strategies that are really of like different scales and different specificity. And so to say the agencies shall support implementation of those, I think is not helpful in the long run. I mean, and you could use, you could think of examples, right? Like you could have a place-based plan that supported a new storage project or a new dam, but of course we don't have the data, we don't have the analysis, we haven't done either the environmental analysis or the legal analysis of it. And then you get to this number 5 where it says the department shall support implementation. So I think that's kind of putting the cart before the horse, and we would strongly oppose that language. In 6B, we also have concerns over the language, the agencies may incorporate the strategies into the IWRS. I mean, these plans are basin specific, right? Or like, not even basin specific, but hydrologic area specific, not necessarily importable into a statewide IWRS. I think the language from the statute, right, shall consider is probably, we should just stick with the statutory language. And then I guess similar to April's comments, I think we really need to think about how we need to specify how any language in here would apply to plans that were already recognized. Because I think some of this language is not consistent with the understanding that was in place at the time that those plans were recognized. And so it may be inadvertently making those plans something that they weren't intended to be, or that the state recognition was not sort of intended to confer upon them. And then that's it.
Thanks, Lisa. Steve, I see you've come off camera. Do you have something to say? Yes. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, hi. Just to ask Lisa, I'm curious what you think the state should do in regards to implementation of the plans. Would you like the state to not support implementation of the plans? Or what exactly are you getting at there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of the sort of rub here for me is that we don't have a lot of clarity about what exactly should be in these plans, right? It's, I think they're a great way to bring people together and find agreement around some ideas and some concepts. But as far as, being a vehicle that shall be, implemented by the state, I don't think we have enough specificity as to sort of the scale of the strategies, what's allowed in the strategies, what's, so I just don't, I don't think these are a vehicle to actually import implementable projects straight into the state, a shall implement sort of mandate. And so I think without that kind of work being done, I don't think, I don't support it. I don't support that language.
Lily, you are muted.
Again, you should not go on mute. Thank you for that response. I see that we have 4 minutes left, and I have some next steps and wrap up. So I just let's Peggy, why don't we have you, and then April, and then we'll move on to the wrap up.
Yeah, thank you. I'll make it really quick. I hear Lisa's comments and I hear her concerns, but I also think that if people are going to spend their time doing this planning, they need some guarantee that there will be some positive outcome. So I don't know what the answer is. I hear Lisa's concerns, but there needs to be some sort of reason to do all this work, or why should I? Anyway, thanks.
Thanks, Peggy. April.
Yes, I was just going to say, I think it would be helpful for the next meeting as we start to get into more of these terms, similar as with this meeting where we had ability to compare statute with proposed rule language. I think that would be helpful, because I will admit I'm trying to go back and forth and I'm struggling with finding everything. And where we have the ability to be flexible, let's do that. But if it's coming directly from statute, then I think we're going to have to work with that language as best we can and clarify where we can. But it might be helpful if it's not too much work to have that when we get into the next set of stuff. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. So we have 3 minutes left. I did not see any public comment. So I think unless speak now or forever hold your peace, or at least until October, hold your peace. Let's do a quick wrap up of next steps. Sorry. If you have any additional input about today's conversation, about what we've talked about, please email them to me. Please email that to me by September 23rd so we can include it in our pre-meeting materials for next time. I think we will start the next meeting with this conversation. I don't think we've finished it. So we will continue. We will make sure that we're not done talking about what plan recognition means, what state recognition means. We'll start that at the next meeting. So if you have thoughts about it, please email those to me. And then if we are working on incorporating time into our next RAC meeting around potential areas of scope expansion, which we talked about at the last meeting, we have cataloged these bullets here as potential areas for scope expansion. If you have other items that we should consider or specific language for any of these topics, please send those to me also by September 23rd so we can incorporate that into the prep materials that we send out for the next meeting. Just as a reminder, if you have questions about the rulemaking process, please reach out to Margot. Her email is up here. Our next RAC meeting is going to be October 17th, and it's going to be an hour longer. It'll be 3 hours. We'll make sure we have some good breaks in there for you. And make sure that you just register and get the Zoom link before then. I did want to just address, we didn't get done with our discussion around state recognition today. And I wanted to throw it out to the group to see if folks would like some more time than we currently have scheduled for a 4th RAC meeting. We can schedule that in November if people would like some more time. We can schedule it now, and then if we end up not needing it, we can just cancel it. What it would mean is just that this is our current rulemaking timeline. We have one last RAC meeting on October 17th, and public comment on the draft rules would be in November or December. If we added that 4th RAC meeting, it would just move the public comment period to December or January. We would still get the rules to the commission in March of 2025. So I don't know if folks have any thoughts about that, if we want to make some more time just in case. If anyone has any input.
I feel like that would probably be a good idea, at least set that time aside. If we don't need it, great, but I think we have some really great viewpoints that if we had the extra time, we could delve into things a little bit deeper.
I agree. I think scheduling another meeting would be beneficial. And as you indicated, if we don't need it, then we can get time back. I would also caution, I guess, that regardless of how we do the schedule, trying to avoid the public comment period being exclusively over the holiday break. And I know that's always challenging, but just, bear in mind, don't have it right around New Year's or Christmas if we can. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, April. It's a good and important point. Okay, so I think we will send out a scheduling poll to try to get something on your calendars for November. And if we need it, we will use it. And if we don't, we won't. Okay, so you can expect an email from me with the meeting recording this week. And then in 2 weeks, I'll send out the prep materials for the next meeting in October. And like I said, if you have any additional comments, please send that to me within the next week so we can make sure we have it prepped for the next meeting. All right, thank you all so much. As always, I'm always impressed how thoughtful and just how much brain power is in this group. So thank you so much, and we'll see you guys in a month.